My wife cheated on me with my younger brother, and they stole $15,000. But when I uncovered their fraud scheme, I legally destroyed their lives and left them broke, jobless, and with no future. I'm 28 years old. I work in corporate finance, and about 6 months ago, I discovered that my wife and my younger brother not only betrayed me in the worst possible way, but they were also trying to rob me. And when I say rob me, I'm not talking about a few $100s. I'm talking about amounts that would have completely destroyed my financial life. What happened after that? Well, let's just say I made sure they both paid for every second of their betrayal, and I don't regret absolutely anything I did. I guess I should start by explaining a bit about my family, so you understand the full context of this story. My brother Ian is 27 years old, only a year younger than me, but our entire lives he was treated like the family's golden child. He was the charismatic one, the one who everyone liked, the one who could convince anyone of anything with that perfect smile he had. I was the responsible son, the one who focused on his career, the one who worked hard and didn't cause problems. Our parents, especially my mother Nancy, always defended him in everything, no matter what. He could come home drunk at 3 in the morning and my mother would say he was going through a difficult phase, while if I arrived 15 minutes late from university, she'd lecture me about responsibility. You know how it is, some kids are born being the favorites and there's nothing you can do about it. I accepted that dynamic a long time ago, or so I thought. I met Nicole about 5 years ago at a work conference. She worked in marketing for a pretty big company. She was smart, funny. We hit it off from the beginning. We got married 3 years ago. It was a small but nice wedding, nothing extravagant. The first 2 years were good, honestly, or at least that's what I believed. We had a house in a good neighborhood. We both earned well. We were planning to start trying for a baby soon. My brother Ian also lived in the city. He worked in sales for a tech company, and as expected, with his personality, he was doing pretty well. Nicole and he got along well, maybe too well looking back, but I never suspected anything because, well, he was my brother. Who suspects their own brother, right? Things started getting weird about 8 months ago. Nicole started going out more often with work friends. She always had her phone close by and would put it face down when she left it on a table, which she never did before. She started dressing differently, more dressed up to go to supposed casual meetings. Ian also started appearing more often in conversations, like Nicole would mention that she'd run into him at the coffee shop near her office, or that she'd gone to ask him for advice about something or other. At first I didn't think much of it. They were adults. They could have their own friendship independent of me, but there was something in how she said it, something in her tone that made me uncomfortable, even though I couldn't explain exactly what. It was my best friend Peter, who planted the seed of doubt, I think. One day we were having beers at my place. Nicole had supposedly gone out with her friends, and Peter very casually asked me if Nicole and Ian spent a lot of time together. I asked him why, and he shrugged and said something like, "I don't know. I saw them the other day at that Italian restaurant downtown and they seemed very close. But I'm sure it's nothing." I tried not to overthink it, but the truth is that after that I started noticing more things. The messages on her phone that she hid, the calls she answered in another room, the increasingly elaborate excuses about where she'd been. About 6 months ago, I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I told Nicole I had to travel for work for 3 days to another city, a conference I supposedly couldn't turn down. She didn't even seem upset. In fact, she seemed almost relieved, which already confirmed to me that something was definitely going on. The day I was supposedly leaving for the airport, I stayed at a hotel near home and hired a guy I knew from college, Harold, who was now a lawyer specializing in divorces, and asked him for advice on what to do legally. He suggested I get solid evidence before confronting anyone, and he also helped me discreetly install a tracking app on Nicole's phone, something completely legal, considering the phone plan was in my name, and I paid the bills. I know, it sounds terrible, but at that moment, I needed to know the truth. The first night of my supposed trip, Nicole left the house around 8 at night. I followed her using the tracking app and guess where she went? Straight to Ian's apartment. She stayed there past midnight. The second night, the same thing. The third night, I decided to see them in person. I followed them when they left Ian's apartment together. They went to a coffee shop a few blocks away, sat at a table in the back, and I watched them laugh, touch each other's hands, behave exactly like a couple. I took photos, with my phone, dozens of photos from my car parked across the street. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what I was seeing. My wife and my brother, my own younger brother, the same one I had defended our whole lives when he got into trouble, were betraying me in the vilest way possible. But wait, because it gets worse. Much worse. When I got back home after my business trip, I acted completely normal. Nicole also acted normal, asked me how the trip had been, told me about her boring week at home working and watching Netflix. I just nodded and smiled, while inside I was dying. But I didn't do anything yet, because Harold had advised me to be strategic, get all the information possible before making any moves. So I kept acting like nothing was wrong for a few more weeks while I investigated deeper. It was while checking our shared bank accounts that I found something that made my blood run cold. Nicole had been withdrawing small but consistent amounts of money, like $500 or $800 each week, for the last 4 months. Adding it all up, she had taken out almost $15,000 without telling me anything. And where was that money going? To an account I didn't know about. An account that was in her name but seemed to be linked to some kind of investment scheme. I investigated more and discovered that both Nicole and Ian had invested in a fraudulent business run by a guy named Everett Sharp, a professional con artist who sold investment opportunities that were basically pyramid schemes in disguise. And the best part of it all, or the worst, depending on how you look at it, is that they were using my money to finance this stupidity, money that Nicole had been systematically stealing from our shared accounts. At that point, I had enough evidence. I talked to Harold again, and he helped me build an absolutely airtight case. We had the photos of them together, the tracking app records, showing Nicole spending nights at Ian's apartment, the bank records, showing the money withdrawals and the hidden account, everything. Harold told me that with that evidence, the divorce would be quick, and I could recover everything Nicole had stolen, probably with additional damages. But I wanted more than that. I wanted both of them to really pay for what they'd done to me. First, I confronted Nicole. I came home one day after work, put all the printed photos on the kitchen table and told her, "Sit down, we need to talk." She saw the photos and her face went completely white, like she didn't have a drop of color. She tried to deny it at first, say the photos were taken out of context, that Ian and she were just friends. But when I showed her the GPS records from her phone, showing all the nights she'd spent at his apartment, she broke down. She started crying, saying she was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that she loved me and that we could fix this. I asked her how long it had been going on, how long she'd been lying to my face, and she could barely speak between sobs, but finally admitted they'd been seeing each other like this for about 5 months. I didn't yell, didn't break anything, just looked at her and told her, in the calmest voice I could manage, "Pack your things and get out of my house tonight. And by the way, I also know about the money you've been stealing and the investment scam with Everett Sharp, so I hope you enjoyed that money, because you're going to have to return it all with interest." She tried to speak, but I left the room. That night, she went to stay with a friend. I don't know or care who. 2 days later, I went to Ian's apartment. I knocked on the door, and when he opened it, he had that confident smile as always. Like, "Hey bro, what's up? How are you?" As if he hadn't been sleeping with my wife for months. I said, "I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" And he said, "Sure, go ahead." We went into his living room, and I sat on his couch, the same couch where he'd probably been with Nicole, and I told him, "I know about you and Nicole. I know everything." His face changed immediately. The smile disappeared, and for the first time in my life, I saw my younger brother genuinely scared. He tried to explain, say it wasn't planned, that it just happened, that Nicole and he had connected emotionally, and that I wasn't making her happy. That last part infuriated me more than anything else. I said, "Are you seriously going to blame me for you deciding to sleep with my wife? That's your argument?" He started stammering more excuses, but I interrupted him. I told him, "I also know about the money Nicole stole from our accounts to put into that fraudulent investment of yours with Everett Sharp. So not only did you betray me as a brother, you also participated in robbing me. That's a federal crime, Ian. Did you know that?" He went pale and told me he didn't know Nicole was taking money from our accounts, that he thought it was money she had saved. I told him I didn't care what he thought, that I was going to make sure both he and Nicole paid for what they'd done to me. I left his apartment and haven't spoken to him since. The next day, my mother called me, completely hysterical, saying how could I treat them like this, that Ian was my brother and that mistakes happen, that Nicole was devastated and that I was being cruel. I told her I wasn't interested in her opinion, that she had defended Ian his whole life, no matter what he did, and that this time, it wasn't going to work. She kept insisting, saying family forgives, that marriage requires work, all that garbage people say when they don't want to admit someone did something unforgivable. I told her I didn't want to talk about it anymore and hung up. Since then, we've talked maybe 2 or 3 times, very brief and cold conversations. With Harold's help, the next thing I did was freeze all our shared accounts. Since my name was on all of them, and I could prove Nicole had been withdrawing money without my knowledge for fraudulent purposes, the bank cooperated completely. We also managed to freeze that hidden account where she'd put the 15,000 stolen dollars. Nicole called me like 50 times that day, left voicemails crying and screaming, saying she didn't have access to money and what was she supposed to do. I didn't answer a single call. Harold filed the divorce papers a week later, with all the evidence attached, the photos, the bank records, the GPS movements, everything. It was such a solid case that Nicole's lawyer basically told her she had no chance of fighting and that she'd better accept the terms we were proposing. But I didn't stop there, because Ian was still left. He worked in sales for a pretty prestigious tech company, and it turns out I knew the regional director of that company through professional contacts. I arranged a lunch with him, very casual, and during the conversation I casually mentioned that I'd heard Ian had some serious personal problems and was involved in a fraudulent investment scheme that could bring legal trouble. I didn't give specific details, just planted the seed of doubt. 2 weeks later, Ian was fired. Officially, it was for company restructuring, but I know exactly why it happened. He called me yelling, saying I had ruined his career. How could I do that to my own brother? I told him he ruined his own career when he decided to betray me, and hung up. The divorce was finalized about 3 months after we filed the papers. Nicole signed everything without fighting. I think her lawyer made it very clear she didn't have any cards to play. I kept the house. Most of our savings once the $15,000 she had stolen were recovered, and she had to pay me additional compensation for legal expenses. I watched her sign the papers in the lawyer's office and felt absolutely nothing. No sadness, no anger, no satisfaction, just a kind of empty indifference. She tried to talk to me after the signing, say something about how she was sorry for everything that had happened, but I just nodded and left without responding. But wait, because there's still more. Remember Everett Sharp's fraudulent investment scheme? Well, it turns out that when we froze Nicole's account, that alerted the bank to suspicious activity, and they started investigating deeper. They found that both Nicole and Ian had transferred significant amounts of money to this guy, and the bank reported the transactions as potentially fraudulent to the appropriate authorities. Everett Sharp was eventually arrested for fraud and tax evasion, and as part of the investigation, both Nicole and Ian were fined for participating in the scheme. The fines were pretty considerable, like in the range of $10,000 each, plus the legal fees they had to pay to defend themselves. They weren't arrested because they proved they were victims of the scheme more than perpetrators, but it still cost them a ton of money that neither of them had at the time. Ian eventually had to move out of the city because he couldn't get work anywhere. His reputation was completely destroyed in our industry. The last time my mother called me to talk about him was about 2 months ago, saying he'd moved to another city to live with a college friend while trying to rebuild his life. I didn't ask for more details or offer to help him in any way. About Nicole, I know very little. I deleted all her social media and contact numbers, but Peter told me he'd seen that she moved in with her parents in another state because she couldn't afford to live alone after paying all the fines and legal costs. Today, I'm 28 years old. I still work in corporate finance, and I'm doing very well professionally. About a month ago, I got promoted to a senior position with a pretty significant salary increase. I sold the house I shared with Nicole because I didn't want to keep living there with all those memories, and bought a smaller apartment but in a better area of the city. I started going to the gym regularly, something I'd stopped doing during my marriage, and I'm in the best physical shape of my life. I go out with friends, travel when I can. Basically, I'm living my life exactly how I want without having to answer to anyone. Do I regret how I handled the whole situation? No, not one bit. Some people have told me I went too far, that revenge isn't healthy, that I should have forgiven and moved on. But I don't see what I did as revenge. I see it as justice. They made conscious decisions to betray me in the worst possible ways, and I simply made sure they faced the consequences of those decisions. I didn't do anything illegal to them. I didn't do anything they didn't deserve. Every action I took was calculated, strategic, and completely within the bounds of the law. If their lives fell apart after that, well, that's a direct result of their own actions, not mine. My mother still occasionally tries to get me to fix things with Ian. Sends me text messages every few months saying family is important, that he's regretful, that I should be the older brother and forgive. I don't even respond to those messages anymore. The truth is, I don't feel anything toward Ian anymore. Not hate, not love, just nothing. To me, it's as if he doesn't exist. A few weeks ago, my father, who had remained mostly neutral in all this, called me and told me he understood why I'd done what I did, that he didn't blame me, and that he respected my decision to cut contact with Ian. That call meant more to me than he probably imagines, because it was the first time someone in my family acknowledged that I had every right to feel what I felt and do what I did. Last week I was having dinner with Peter at a new restaurant that opened near my apartment, one of those hipster places with fusion food that's trendy now. And he asked me if I ever thought about trying to have a serious relationship with someone again. I told him honestly I don't know, that right now I'm fine alone, that I'm not in a hurry to get into anything complicated. He nodded and said something like, "Makes sense. After everything you went through, you need time for yourself." And he's right, I guess. Maybe someday I'll meet someone and be ready to try again. But for now, I'm completely fine. Focusing on my career, on my friends, on my life. I've learned that I can trust myself, that I can handle the worst betrayals and come out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. And that, honestly, is more valuable than any relationship.